Welcome to another edition of the Sport Management Office Hours. I am one of your hosts, Brandon Podgorski, joined with Dr. Nick Zoroya, as we do every episode. And I'm really excited today. We have one of my colleagues on the show who have gotten to know over the past few years, Dr. Lane Wakefield from Baylor University. And what I'm most excited about, we like to highlight people who are doing some really interesting things in the sport management space. And I don't know any faculty member who's doing as cool and kind of interesting opportunities that Lane is providing for students. Us, both Nick and I, coming from a small college background and certainly more teaching based backgrounds as opposed to research, we really try to look for opportunities to get students into the industry. And I think Lane does as good a job of that as anybody else. So, first, Lane, just welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me on, fellas. I'm excited to learn more about what you guys are up to as well.
Well, let's start with this because I want to get into all the competitions that you're doing there in Baylor. But how did you get involved? How did you get started in higher ed? Because I think you may have been like us. You come more from maybe kind of a practical background where you worked in sports. I think you coached for a little bit, and now you've been at Baylor. How long have you been at Baylor? It's probably what, 6, 7, 8 years now?
5 years down.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah,
So, what made you make the switch into the faculty line in higher ed?
sure. Yeah, I always thought I was going to sell in sports, and that was what my job was out of college. I went to a small teaching college, speaking of those, Howard Payne University coming out, and I wanted to sell sponsorships. And so I did that. Unfortunately, back then, mental health was not a term anybody knew, especially me, I guess, and that just caught me by surprise, and I had to start all the way over. So my career that I thought I was going to be in forever, because how can you beat the job where you get to bring your basketball shoes and play at the AT&T Center a couple times a week? I thought I had, everything I ever wanted and more. But had to quit that and start over and got into coaching. Um, it was an interesting job. I loved it, but the hours and nights and weekends of coaching, and my wife was a coach, that wasn't going to be a long-term solve, but still keep up with some of those players and love that time doing that in middle school and high school. But then kept in touch, finished a master's program at Baylor because of after I finished that first job, I had to have somewhere to go. And I was like, well, I knew a master's program was possible because my parents are professors. And like, well, I'm familiar with higher ed to some degree, and I'll go do that. And from there, just kept up with people in that world. Greg Bennett at Texas A&M. I connected with him a couple times about the PhD program, but still thought it was kind of crazy. Even when I went to it, I kept a coaching job on the side at a private school because I need to keep my resume up. If this was not going to work out, I wanted that to be consistent. But yeah, I just saw a path to now not being a seller, but helping students that wanted to be. So getting back at A&M, learning more about sports management, sports marketing, business from a different perspective. I could see how I could help those students go down the path that I was on and hopefully be successful on the way.
And that's really kind of fascinating because, as I've been taking teams to the sales competition for the past few years, and hopefully we can start to do that at ACU as well. But there's always a speaker there that talks about the topic of mental health. But, just maybe from a broader perspective, I think I've had experience in sales. I think Dick's had a little bit of experience in sales as well, specifically in sports sales. And I don't know if people necessarily understand the grind that goes into that. I think there's maybe this thought that, hey, you work for XYZ team, you get to go and you get cool benefits like playing, on the court, but you don't really get to watch the game. When I was in baseball, I'd always say, I'm in from 8 to 5, and then the game starts at 7. I didn't care if we won or lost. Just please don't go into extra innings, right? So, maybe talk a little bit about, your experiences as much as you want to in that sales world and how you're able now to kind of mentor students now on the faculty line.
Yeah, well, isn't that funny how the most fun parts of games become your least favorite parts? Like
Yeah.
extra innings when you're a kid or when you're a fan, you're like this, free baseball. But then, when you're working there, you're like, yeah, I've already seen too much. I'm ready to go home. Feet are tired and all that. Yeah, so working there was awesome, and I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of work, but if you're a seller, you know what you're getting into and you enjoy it. And so there's it depends on who your manager is, and that's what I coach our students on is find a manager first. Josh White was my direct report at that time. He's with Learfield now. But you find somebody that's going to look out for you, is going to mentor you, and is not trying to put too much on you. But good sellers are self-motivated and they're going to keep busy, and that was my case. So I really enjoyed that. And for the mental health part, I think that could have played some role in it. Mental health's tricky because most people, including me to some degree, don't really understand what that means and like what that entails. And so there are social aspects, if you want to call them that, drivers that impact your health, the people that are around you, and the rules they might make in a sales role like that can have an impact. There's also biological issues and
Hmm.
psychological issues, and I had some of that going against me, come to find out as well. And so, yeah, there's not a one size fits all. Not that you were saying that, but there's a misconception that the job can like create that issue, and it can to some degree because that's like part of the puzzle. But it's some of y'all in research, it's a multivariate problem. You've got lots of inputs, and so that's certainly one of them. And I know the sales managers that I speak with have that in mind. They're such a better or different, maybe both, outlook on how their entry level employees can get off to a strong start and not feel overwhelmed on top of the things that are already challenging, at that age or any age, or one of the most stressful things you can do in life.
Yep.
It's start a new job and move. Like those are top five, and they do those at the same time. And so imagine, all that plus feeling some extra weight. I think there's a lot more grace and I don't know, just interest and encouragement from managers. Best I can tell in the last 10, 12 years of working with kids that are heading that direction.
Anecdotally, I think I agree with you. So I'm getting ready to start. We're getting closer and closer every day to starting the research on my dissertation. It's going to be in looking at managers, specifically ticket sales managers, and the promotion of them, and trying to find the best person. The best person who can actually effectively lead. Not so much who was the best salesperson, and okay, let's make them manager. Sometimes those skills don't necessarily correspond real well. And I tell my students the same thing. And I think with what you're doing with the sales competitions, and I think just in the industry as a whole, they're starting to understand that. Just with how tough that industry can be, just with the hours and the nights and the weekends and everything. So, that might be a good segue to talk about what you are doing now at Baylor. So you've been at Baylor for 5 years, and you're kind of the pioneer of the sports sales championships on the sports side. So let's talk about that. How did this come about? How did you come up with the sports sales? Because now it's not just tickets. Now we're in corporate sales and digital marketing and analytics and everything else.
Yeah. Well, like any good idea, it's usually not your own. uh, I was talking to a friend at the Hawks, Eric Platt. He's now the VP of partnerships. He was the director of ticket sales at the time, and he had recruited at a sales competition that was not sports focused at all, but they'd spent a good chunk of change recruiting, and they came up with zero candidates. And he
Mhm.
said, "You should do something like that." Mind you, I'd never been to one. But he said you should do one like that and make it for kids that want to work in sports.
Amazing. And so, it was 2020 the first year that it happened?
I think it was 2019. We're going in our
2019.
seventh
Okay.
year, so I think if I'm doing the math right. And then we had the COVID year, and
That
so
was
we
good.
we had an online version, which was some of the blessings in life come from the hardest things. I think
Hmm.
we want to go down the mental health path, like at least in the short version, like that came to a career that I had never thought about, and it's been great. The COVID was the same. It's like, well, nobody wants to do anything online, but we did, and we figured out, and it'd be perfect now because we have this freemium model, if you think about it that way, of students and professors like, yeah, I'll give it a shot online for free, and then some will never come to Atlanta, and that's more than okay. But then there are some that do come to Atlanta for the championship that probably wouldn't have if the initial ask was, pony up and get everybody on an airplane. But after a year or two of doing the online competitions, they're up for it. So yeah, it's been a good going into 7 years now. So thanks and shout out to the Hawks for planting the seed and believing in me and at Mercer in those days. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So, and the Hawks do a fantastic job hosting this. I mean, it's really first rate. Let's just stick with the ticket sales competition. So we could talk about each one maybe individually if you'd like, but just sticking with ticket sales. So I think that was the first one that launched. Students have the opportunity in the fall. Anybody can get involved, any school can get involved, where students can take part in a virtual role play. And then based on their scores, kind of like March Madness, the top 64 will advance individually to in-person competitions to Atlanta. So maybe just kind of walk through each phase of that, what's involved, and then what's kind of been the feedback that you've been getting from professors, because this just seems to continue to grow year after year after year.
Yeah, it has, and that's like you said, largely due to the Atlanta Hawks providing the first-rate experience when we're there. We wouldn't be in existence for this, without them. And they pour in and say yes to more than I expect every time. So that's been the number one reason we're doing anything right, is because we end up there. The online portion, well, I guess to zoom out a little, what we're trying to do is give a merit-based opportunity for anyone to level up their network. You want to think about it that way. We have students from smaller schools like Howard Payne, I was in back in the day, and where I guess you guys are small to medium-sized schools, at the moment. Sometimes those schools have great connections. I'm sure you two are, or I know at least Brandon's background a little more. But Nick, either way, I'm sure you have some connections more so than other professors, and so that can be tougher on the students that have a professor or have an advisor or program that's a little less connected. But you might have a stud, a handful of students or just a great group that's taught really well, but they haven't had the chance to show that they belong in a network with whatever schools and teams that are, recruiting, every year. And so it's that virtuous cycle of merit with networking. And so we're providing this merit-based opportunity to upgrade the network of a kid or a program or what have you through this competition. So online, it's almost like the NCAA tournament, right? You've got the Steph Currys of the world that are at Davidson and the big school kids too, right? They place well, but the point is you have a chance for anybody to show up and get a job and be seen. So yeah, the process is online in the fall. And you mentioned the role playing leading into the in person. We do role play, or will role play in Atlanta, always, most likely. But the virtual, we're taking a risk this fall, and so we've sent out just an email. I have a meeting this week about it, so it's been piloted. We'll just see how it goes. But I'll tell you what we're doing. We're not role playing online anymore. We are going to role play this year again in person. It's a great way for again for the merit based issue or perspective. You got the manager watching the kid sell, and like that's perfect. Like they can do it, and you can see them in person. And that was great online too. But the problem, and you might remember this, Brandon, you have your top, what is it, 8 at the most that we allowed
Mhm.
to do the online. But what about your ninth kid? Or what about the 12th kid who hadn't quite gotten it together yet?
Yep.
But after they graduate, they're stellar. And we just weren't giving as much opportunity for kids that are down the line, or maybe your school or our school even. You only bring like 5 or 6 kids. So we would only have 6 do the online because they were the ones that we could bring, to Atlanta. All that to say, long answer, but we've created showcases and piloted this showcase format this semester, and then we're bringing that in the fall. And the showcase is, like I mentioned, having a schedule that looks like one day in class, maybe one a month, or however often the professor might want to do it. Has a matchup, just like a sports team, against another school. But we created a 45-minute competition that goes through 3 or 4 different challenges that are timed and tested to be exciting and interesting, and end up with some stats for the individual and then for the school that will then, it's the regular season, right, that leads into the championship in Atlanta.
So will all students have an opportunity then in person in Atlanta, or will it still be like the top 64? How's that work?
So for the role playing, we're still limited to 64 slots and ticket sales, and 64, we'll expand that in corporate partnerships this year. But the other challenges at the in-person event are mirrored in the online as well. And so when you come to Atlanta, you can earn points for yourself and for your school through the role play, but you can also earn points in different challenges around the building. So, and even if you were in the role play, if half the crew gets knocked out each round, so
Mhm.
having more ways to show your skills is part of the process.
That was something I always talked about with our students before we went to Atlanta, because I mean the competition is a big part of it, but we would always bring four. So anybody who participated in the fall, we'd always make sure they get to go to Atlanta, even if they didn't go into the top 64. But I would tell them, like, guys, listen, you still got an opportunity to do the networking competition, the quantum quiz, which is another thing that you guys added. It's like, there's still opportunities, and not to mention the networking that you get to do with all the industry professionals. But even if you don't make that top 64, you still got an opportunity to win a championship if you want to do that. And again, maybe and then talk about that, the structure once they get to Atlanta. Not only are the students actually in there selling and doing the role play, but we've got people just kind of around that they can just go up to and start a conversation with.
Yeah. So we have a whole day typically for interviewing. And so the idea is those managers, they've identified some people coming in from the online rounds and they've seen resumes. And there's some other students that they meet there or watch compete or both, at the event. And so the next day they can fit them into their interview schedule. And we go to a ball game, at least one each time, which is a lot of fun. The kids study, so they're selling Atlanta Hawks tickets in the role play. So they've learned about the Atlanta Hawks and thought about this for some of them for months. And so when they get in there to actually see it all come to life, I think that's a valuable part of the experience too. And the Hawks, take that to another level with some of the experiences they give the students. But yeah, the competition day, they're role playing, but we're testing a different challenges that the students can do that are engaging and useful for the managers who might be observing them. So it's kind of figuring out what the right balance is of we don't want it to be just a party or what's most fun to the students, although that's great. But if they're not showing a skill that the manager might want to notice, well, that's what we need to do too. But we also don't want it to be so mind-numbing of a typical day-to-day task where it's not that engaging. So you're trying to create a game out of something that otherwise would be a little monotonous. You kind of get that anyway with a competition from other schools there. Like it's not
Mhm.
that's that much rocket science, but it is tinkering a little bit with what works here and there. And luckily, we've had a few events now to test some things out.
Nick, if you have a question, feel free, hop in.
Yeah, yeah. So, Lane, thanks for explaining all that, and I'll give you a little bit of background on my situation, and then I guess I feel like I'm not alone in where I'm at, where I'm considering sending people to this competition online first in Atlanta, but all of it's still pretty new to me. I've only talked to people that have gone and said great things. I've done some research on the internet. I mean, at Madonna, we're a school of about 1,000. We have undergrads. I have 90 sport management majors, and over the years, we've developed a full blown ticket sales course. And we work with the Lions, and we get one on one training from them. We work with Playfly Aspire. We work with industry partners, like you had mentioned. But it's now about taking that next step for the students and creating an experience outside of just selling one game for one local sports franchise, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. And we've even gone as far as to get funding from a donor to eventually, if it all works out, send at least two students to Atlanta this year if it comes to that. So I guess my question is, I've gone through the website and I see bits and pieces about how this whole thing works, but for someone that is completely brand new to this, where would I start? and I guess how do we get to the point where I have, let's say, two students in Atlanta?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for checking it out and congrats on getting the program together. That's no small feat to get everything lined up that you already have and
Yeah.
getting the ticket sales. There's a sales course in general and having so many kids. That's terrific. Um, but yeah, the process there, the first 64 schools that register for the online, which we're calling showcases this year, they are guaranteed one spot in each bracket. So the role play brackets in Atlanta and ticket sales and corporate partnerships, you get those, one automatically. If you want more than one, so if we have less than 64 schools come to Atlanta, which we haven't had come that many yet, we had 79 online last year. 45 came to Atlanta. Usually two-thirds end up coming. So all to say, until we get to that point, there will be some schools with the second spot in a particular bracket, and those go down to the rankings. Then we seed the students, so the brackets are seeded based on their rankings as well, so how they perform. online. So we open registration on Friday. So we'll send an email out to everybody on our list. So if you're not on our list, we sent one last week to kind of prime it and get them ready for some of these changes. If you didn't see anything last week, you can always reach out to me. Um, you can find us on our LinkedIn page, however else you want to get in our world. Happy to have you. We have students in schools of all sizes. You mentioned 1,000. That sounds like Howard Payne, where I grew up, about that size. And then we have some that are, huge. It's a range. But yeah, that's the general process, completely free. We're working on the numbers to see if we can't fly out some of the top ranked students. So even if they don't have the donor like you have, but they are the best, we want them to be there. So that's in the works as well. But yeah, happy to have you join us this time around.
Okay, so basically, it's all starts with just registering for the fall, and then how different, I guess, is the process for the other aspects of it? So ticket sales seems pretty straightforward. Um, I've seen everything from the quiz to the role play to the analytics. How many of those are actually in Atlanta at the same time, or are they all separate?
Yeah. Ticket sales and corporate partnership sales are at the same time, same championship. And what we learned was it's successful. And so the test was, can we replicate it? And sports analytics had already been going on. My dad, who just retired from the program, he started one the year I started one at Mercer, or this at Mercer. He started a sports analytics championship. So that's done pretty well too. I think it's in its third year. They took a year off, I think, during COVID. All to say, those two, and then the test was, what if we put this in digital marketing, like the same format, the cookie cutter type approach to the challenges was on, by design, that if this worked, we could insert other content. And so I gave it a shot in digital marketing where I didn't know anybody. I taught the subject, but not connected at all with recruiters or professors in the same way as I am in sports. And so that went really well. We're 2 years in there and had a stronger response in year 1 and 2 than we had in sports sales. And so that just gave some encouragement that there's a demand in the market for, students that want to compete and they want to have a ranking by their name, not just based on the logo of their school, although that's great, but put some meat behind it by showing up, online or in person, that shows that they know how to do a particular job.
Well, and I'll tell you that was part of the pitch when development asked me, what projects do you need money for? And I said, well, there's few places where we can put our students directly in competition with big brand name schools where they're listed. I literally showed them the graphics where they're literally listed next to other schools that are 10 times our size, 50 times our size in some cases.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty good selling point for us to secure funding because that is rare. We all have great students, all of us are branded differently, and the fact that we get to put them up against each other and let them compete and show that we also have, like you said, it's very much that March Madness feel. You do have Cinderellas all the time, and so it is a really unique experience for the students. And yeah, I can't wait to get some students on board this year.
Yeah, just don't beat us, Nick.
I mean, we'll try, we'll do our best, but we are young and inexperienced, so I think this first year or two will be a learning it'll be a bit of learning, but we'll get there. We'll get there for sure.
Well, that's the fun of it. And I found just in the handful of years doing it, there are more Cinderellas than there are in, stick and ball sports. Um, there's just a lot of talent out there, and the way that they get to the schools, either recruiting for, I guess, keeping the sports analogy, it's easier to know who the best players are. It's a little harder to know who the best students are. And so this helps, and that gives it a new kind of sorting mechanism.
That was for me. I think that was one of the most fun parts about the competition. Trying when I was there, being a little D3 in Northeast Indiana. Um, you know, I would always say I'd put our students up against anybody. We just don't have kind of the breadth of some of these bigger schools. And the nice things about your Florida States and your Arizona States, Baylor probably too as well. A lot of these students can get plugged in and connected as freshmen working in the athletic department and start to kind of get those sales chops at a young age, or relatively young age. And that's amazing. And those are really great things for those programs, and they're just natural marketing pieces. We don't have that at small schools, but if you give, I think, professors who've had some of that practical experience and time, we can ramp students up within 10 weeks and at least make them competitive. And I think that's, it's such a great, to Nick's point, a great marketing piece for smaller schools that don't have a big brand name behind them to say, hey, listen, our students could be competitive with some of these other schools and look at our program as an alternative.
That's right. Yep.
So what have been some of your success stories, whether it just, be for the school or for Baylor at large, however you want to approach it with these competitions? I mean, I know personally, I've had a handful of students who got jobs in the industry, selling tickets because of these competitions. What have you seen on your side as the one who's administering these programs?
Yeah, well, I see students like yours. You had a gal that start with the Tigers, right? A couple of years ago.
Nikki, yep.
Yeah, and she was stellar. There is no shortage of those stories when you have 50 or 60 get placement with a pro team or minor league team coming out of that competition. Some that are there to recruit directly, like Nikki, but then you have some that are recruited just down the way. We start putting rankings on LinkedIn, and people get reached out to from that, or they see it on their resume. It's becoming more common for a student to come back and say that the manager that they interviewed with saw I had a ranking or saw that I'd been a part of the sales championship, even ones that hadn't been to it before. So it's fun to
Yeah.
see people are somewhat aware of that, and it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is give them some other metric to say that hey, the students has at least spent the time. But on top of that, maybe had some success. So it's fun. It's why you do it. I mean, so many things as a professor that you can put your time into, and that's the beauty of the job, and maybe the curse too. But it's the joy of seeing a student from even our own students who have the connections, and we know all the schools or all the teams that are there to recruit. We invited them, so we didn't
Yeah.
need the students to meet them. But at the same time, our students get a lot out of competing because they are spending, I guess, more engaged time to practice because they want to win, but then they get to meet their managers in person, the ones that might hire them. And they're not all hired every year either.
Yep.
So there are better ones, of course, like anybody else's school are. Yeah, it's fun to see across the board. Because even if somebody's at a big school, they're not maybe going against all the odds, but in their head, they are.
Sure. Yep.
Everybody kind of sees themselves as an underdog to some extent because they are. I mean, there's a kid from sometimes the middle of nowhere, Texas, or we get a lot of kids from California, and wherever else we might find students. And so they have their own stories, and so you get to learn about them and see where they're trying to go. And yeah, when you're 21 or 22 and you're talking about moving to DC and working for an NFL team, like that's a little bit different than what they were doing the last few years in Waco or from their high school. So it's a it's a journey, and it's fun to play a little role in it.
One of the roles that you do play in this that's actually graded on the rubric is that of ethics, and I think that speaks to kind of what we talked about earlier with maybe the industry changing a little bit. Anytime I would start to bring up the topic of sales with my students, I think automatically you kind of start to paint a picture of kind of the skeevy used car salesman who's trying to push you into something that you don't really want. But I don't know if we really do that so much in ticket sales. I'm sure there are people who are, but there's so much more of a consultative selling. And part of being graded in these competitions is that of integrity and having good ethics and having good integrity in dealing with customers. So where did that come from? And why do you think that's so important?
Our program's always had that since my dad started it in 2004. The focus has been on integrity. And Daryl Lanus, whose seat I'm sitting in now, he was in the athletic department at Baylor and switched over to the business school. And so when they got started, it's always been values based and values focused. And then as I've come along, building on what they've started, I've seen for myself beyond just hearing about it and reading through the stuff that we teach our students and being at a Christian school too. That's a focus for us as well. But we know from sellers and their managers that the best ones are the ones that have their values in order, the ones that they can trust. Every manager I've talked to and asked, you, do you have the story of the guy you couldn't or the girl you couldn't trust and what happened to them? And some of them will tell you this, it was not just the first year seller who wasn't bringing a lot to the table. I could tell you 3 or 4 stories of the number one seller on the team who was
Mm.
bringing $1 million plus to the table that they had to let go because of their values or lack of ethics. So I think their sales skills can always improve. And I'm sure we've all heard the sales managers talk about how they can coach people up. And I think that's true. But you can't, it's much harder anyway to coach values and ethics after a certain age, right? The Bible says to train up a child in the way they should go. And part of that is because once you're older, it's a lot harder to teach a old dog new tricks. Like you're set, in your ways, and so having those years that we get to have with them, 3, 4 years as a college student, it's impactful and sets the way that they think. You're not completely, but at least has some impact.
So how many competitions are you up to now? We talked about ticket sales, we got corporate sales, analytics, digital marketing. Anything I'm missing?
Yeah, so we did a consulting championship this year
That's
for
right.
the first time with our management department. So collaborating with them was a lot of fun. Last year we did a Canadian sports sales championship with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment in Toronto. They had a shift in leadership, so we took a pause this year on it, but hopefully we'll bring it back. But yeah, it's 4 or 5, depending on how you count it. And more meetings with different majors in the building too to try and rope them in with the concept, and we'll see where it goes.
So Nick, any other follow-up questions from you?
Just one. So you mentioned before the show that you're kind of adding some more regional competitions or maybe a weekly competition. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the regular season, if you want to think about it that way, so if Atlanta's the finish line, then how can we get stats and background on the students before they get there? I've had students every year who have good careers and are good sellers, but the first round they lose for one reason or another in their role play. But it wouldn't make sense if there was no extra information on that student. I just think about Trey Young. He lost, I think, the first round when he was on OU's team, his only year in the NCAA tournament. And so if you only judged him on that, like he had a good day, I think they lost to Rhode Island. But going in, he had already set records, assist records. He was already on different watch lists. He had I think a 50-point game or a 48 something point game against Oklahoma State. He had, I can't remember how many 20 assist games that set some record for that year. He was the last player to lead the country in points and assists in the same year, and like one of the few to ever do that. So going into the tournament, like he was going to be a lottery pick, if not a top 5 pick already. They just didn't know exactly. So we want to give students the same opportunity to be seen a little earlier. And there are a couple ways to do it. So we mentioned the showcases, and that's what signups are starting for on this Friday. And we'll go through the summer, and there are always some that even in early fall that come across it. And then also we're partnering this year with One Huddle. One Huddle is a company that has an app for training and finding talent. So they do this within organizations where they might have an hourly worker who could join the sales team or could be in a different part of the company, but they didn't have the pathway. And One Huddle lets them learn and upskill in the app, and they make it a game. And so their founder is a terrific individual, and he believes in what we're doing, and he wants to back us. And so what we're doing with One Huddle is making games out of the content for sports sales and analytics and digital to where a kid asynchronously. So we have some kids that come across our stuff that don't have a professor like any of us and
Mm.
aren't involved or can't have the time or whatever it is. And some of those will still do everything that we do, but this being asynchronous, it's an easy lift for someone to jump in and learn a few things and see if it might be for them. So the One Huddle score combined with any showcase that they're involved in or multiple and then their in-person performance. We're working on concocting this overall ranking out of that. So 24/7 sports type idea of who the number one, student is, or the number, all the way to number 100, by state. How can you figure out who ought to be recruited based on, a few different factors?
Now, will teams, organizations, will they need to be a part of the competitions to be able to have access to that
Uh,
information?
Access to be a part of the showcases, yes. So they get more time with
Mhm.
your kids and with the schools that are participating. They get more information, so everybody can see the ranking once we get that site
Oh,
up.
cool.
Yeah, just like the 24/7 sports, except for we'll have certain content or information about them that's not public facing, but is on the inside for our recruiters.
I love it. Well, if there's one thing, I mean, you do well, it's constant improvement, and you're always seeking feedback and ways to make it better. And I just think it's been great. I can't wait to hopefully one day get ACU involved as we figure out how to do that in an online environment. But this might be the best way to do it, in
Yeah,
the
well, online's
showcases.
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Don't let that hold anybody back. They think, well, we're never going to go make the trip. Well, a third of the group that's doing online that you fit right in. So
Yeah.
it'll be a fun time.
So if anybody wants to get involved, I know registration is this Friday. As I look at my calendar here, I think it was on the 23rd. How do they get involved? How can they contact you? Excuse me.
Yeah, email Lane_Wakefield at Baylor.edu. You can text or call at 210-913-2727. You can find us on our LinkedIn pages and message that account, and I'll see that. Or our program coordinator, Heather Grover, is very involved in running the show too. So we'll get back to you. Registration, although it starts soon, and it doesn't hurt to sign up sooner than later. Until there are 64 schools signed up, you haven't lost benefits. So it takes time, right, to figure out from your dean and who else your chair that might be involved to help get things in line. I'll say there are students in schools that will sign up into the fall. So it's as much as you want to, as a marketing professor, want to say this is a rush and you got to do it now. Um, there's a little time.
I love it. Well, Lane, thanks so much for coming on and joining us and talking about all the different competitions you're doing at Baylor. And man, just wish you guys all the best moving forward.
Well, thanks to both of you for giving me a chance to talk about them.
Absolutely.